Hello everyone. In this session today, I want to talk about how do you move your database to Alibaba Cloud. Talking to some of our customers and some of our users, people are telling us that usually they have mission critical tasks being handled by a database or a couple of databases, and those databases are either configured on-prem or in another cloud. Now, after careful evaluation, they see all the benefits offered on the Alibaba Cloud, including but not limited to elasticity, to the performance pricing ratio, to scalability, and all that. So people decided to take advantage of all those benefits offered on the Alibaba Cloud. Now, one of the key questions, one of the key concern is, as a user, how can I migrate my databases and my business logic to Alibaba Cloud with minimized business downtime and zero data loss guarantee? So that is the focus for the session today. I'm going to talk about how, from a user perspective, you can use a service called Data Transmission Service, or DTS, to enable both the full data migration as well as the incremental data migration with literally zero impact on your businesses and then zero data loss in the migration process. So let's dive into this scenario, right? Essentially, this is the migration scenario. I've got some of my business logics, right? My product, services, inventory, orders, users, right? And applications pointing to a database that's either on-prem or available on another cloud. Now, I want to migrate my business to the Alibaba Cloud, maybe taking two steps. Step number one, I want to migrate my database to Alibaba Cloud, and then quickly point my business applications to the new database with maybe just a switching time around a few seconds, right? Within a few seconds, I'm able to have my business live and pointing to my target database on the Alibaba Cloud. That's a step number one. Step number two, I can consider moving my business applications as well to the Alibaba Cloud in the long term. But step one is more mission critical. How can I move my databases as well as the data stored in the databases to the cloud without losing data, without having impact on my business? That is continuously running. So this is, in a nutshell, this is a high-level summary of the migration mechanism, right? The functionalities offered within DTS, Data Transmission Service. So imagine you have a data source. Now, things happen in the sequence. Step number one, it is a schema migration. So DTS is smart enough, is intelligent enough to automatically detect the schema objects on the source database and then migrate all the schema objects to your target database. So the step number one here refers to the schema migration process. After your schema objects are fully migrated to the Alibaba Cloud, step number two kicks in, which is to migrate all the stored data. And this step can take a longer time depending on the amount of data, the volume of the data you have on the source database, right? So it could be, maybe 10 gigabyte, 100 gigabyte, maybe even like 100 terabyte, right? It really depends on how much data you have. And as you can imagine, the step here can take relatively longer time. So one of the major concern is, well, given that my business is continuously running in the migration process, if the migration takes 2 hours, I might have generated a lot of data within that 2-hour migration window. Am I losing those incremental data in the migration process, right? So if you migrate the full data, the full tables, and I lose a bunch of data in the migration process, that's definitely not ideal from a business perspective. So that's why we have step number three, to capture the incremental data and migrate the incremental data, monitor and migrate the incremental data after step number two. So everything that your business applications generated in this process, right, during the migration process, all those incremental data has been fully captured in step number 3. At this point, when the full data migration is completed, then step number 3 kicks in to migrate all the incremental data. At the end of this option, your source database and your target database are finally in sync. So I wanted to do a demonstration to demo this process and show you how easy it is to create a DTS task to do the migration. So before I go that, just quickly higher level summary of what DTS is, right? This is a data transmission highway that connects a bunch of your source databases to a bunch of the target databases on the Alibaba Cloud, right? So we support 3 operations: metadata schema operation or metadata schema migration, a full data migration, full table migration, as well as incremental data migration. So connecting to a whole bunch of source databases on the left-hand side, this is the DTS product portfolio. We have a console, we have open API, scheduler, and all that. I'm not going to spend much time to talk about those components. If you're interested, feel free to check out our documentations on alibabacloud.com. But in terms of the migration process, in terms of what's happening within DTS, this is a couple of key components. The evaluation component is responsible doing the pre-checking. So when you kick off, when you initialize the migration process, the evaluation module is going to be responsible for checking a whole bunch of information, the schema objects, making sure the task can be created successfully. And this is all handled in an automatic manner. Now, when the full migration kicks in, from a user perspective, you have the option to define some ETL functions. You can do, some data processing, some data preparation work during the migration or before the migration starts. So when your data is written to the target database, it's already in the format according to your preference. And then you can have incremental data migration. Now the difference here is for the incremental data migration, before the ETL scripts are applied, before you apply the ETL functions, all those incremental data points are going to be stored in this module called dstore. Think of dstore as a broker service that exposes a subscription SDK. So a whole bunch of other applications or target endpoints can subscribe to the dstore. So meaning that in case your data source is not available and supported out of the box, maybe you got this target on Alibaba Cloud on ECS and you configured this target yourself. It's not something that Alibaba Cloud offered as a product or as a service, is something that you developed in-house. In that case, it's unlikely to be available in the target database list. So when that happens, you can have your target to subscribe to the incremental data stored in the dstore. So this is a way to effectively migrating data from the source database to a target according to your preference, including some in-house developed endpoints. So giving you a lot of flexibility. Now, this is what I envision to demonstrate today. I have a MySQL database that is developed in-house and hosted on ECS. So from end user perspective, I just bought ECS from Alibaba Cloud and I run a MySQL database in Singapore region. So assuming that this is, it could be on another cloud, it could also be an on-prem database, but this is your source database. Now I want to migrate this source database to a target database of a different type, right? This is a polar DB for MySQL. It's not exactly MySQL, it's a different kind of database. And in the meantime, I have an application continuously writing data to MySQL database. I want to migrate all the existing data in MySQL ECS to my Polar DB without losing a single data point that my application is writing into MySQL, right? So this write operation continues in the migration process, and then I'll just make sure at the end of the migration, every single records available in my SQL database is also available in my Polar DB that is available in another region. This is Indonesia, Jakarta region. So this is the whole kind of migration process. And then, as I explained previously, this is going to involve 4 different processes behind the scenes. It's going to be pre-checking, schema migration, full data migration, and incremental data migration. Now let's take a look at the end user experience. All right, so this is my browser, and this is the homepage for Alibaba Cloud. I'm going to go to my console page. So over here, let me quickly demonstrate some of my products, available products. So first of all, it is a MySQL database running on my ECS. So ECS is just a virtual machine. I go to my ECS console. All right, Jakarta, let's take a look at the ECS. If you remember what we talked about, it is going to be a MySQL database in Singapore and moving to a PolarDB in Jakarta. So let's go to check the instance in Singapore. Alrighty, so this is my Singapore region. I got a whole bunch of ECS instances, and I'm gonna use specifically this test MySQL instance with the following IP address. So I quickly spinned up this ECS instance using a pre-configured MySQL image. I'm not gonna repeat that process. It's very, very intuitive and straightforward process. Just go to Alibaba Cloud, click ECS, and click create a new instance, and you have the option to create from a pre-configured MySQL image. So I got this MySQL instance over here, and then I'm gonna show you the PolarDB I have. The PolarDB here, right? So the MySQL here in Singapore, this is my source database. And then this PolarDB is my target database. It's not in Singapore. I'm gonna try to move to Indonesia in Jakarta. This is a way to demonstrate cross-region data migration, right? To simulate when you have a database on Prime or you have a database on another cloud provider platform, it'll be very similar process. So I'm gonna use this guy over here. This is a instance that I created for testing purposes. So looks like we've got everything up and running. But before we do the migration, let's quickly log on to this database to make sure we drop all the existing schema so that when we start from scratch. So yeah, looks like we have a test schema here. Let me run this query first to drop the test schema, making sure that succeed. There's no longer a test schema. We start from scratch. There's nothing available in my PolarDB, in my endpoint. So now what I'm gonna show you is the way that we demonstrate the migration. So I'm gonna open a couple of terminals. Bear with me for the technical part, but I'll make sure this is as intuitive as possible. So what I do here is I'm going to document MySQL document programming MySQL. All right, so over here I've got 3 scripts. This one script here is to simulate. I have this application to keep sending data to MySQL database. And these 2 other scripts are accordingly pulling data out of the MySQL database and then pulling data out of the PolarDB database. So initially at this point, if I run, if I do sh migration demo query MySQL, you will be able to see data being pulled out of the MySQL database, right? This is simply a row count. It's a 294 rows available in MySQL, and this is sort of my source database. And then in a very similar manner, I'm gonna try to document. I'm gonna try to MySQL. I'm gonna run another script to query my PolarDB database, right? So this one, right now, it returns an error, right? There's no such schema, there's no such database existing in my PolarDB, it's empty database, right? And then the third script I'm gonna run is, let's go to Documents, Programming, MySQL. I'm gonna run this migration script to insert data to MySQL database. Now, when I start running this script, right, you will be noticing a row count increased in MySQL, right? 294 going to 295, 296. So this is because I'm inserting data to MySQL database, right? Simulating that if you have an application that is running in the whole migration process. And then here, the target doesn't have any data points, right? It's pretty straightforward. Now, what I like to demonstrate is I am gonna go to my DTS. Now, in this case, I am moving data from Singapore MySQL to a Indonesia Jakarta PolarDB. So I'm gonna go to Jakarta and then create a so-called migration task within DTS. So let's give it a name. This is demo migration from, from I don't know, 1 to 2. And instance type, this is my source database. I'm gonna say I want to use a user created database with a public IP address that looks reasonable. That's available in Singapore. It's a MySQL database. And the IP address, let's go to the ECS to copy and paste this IP address. This is on my ECS instance. All right. And then the port number, database account, and password. You just get those passwords and username when you create the MySQL database. Quickly test the connectivity, successful. And I'm gonna configure my destination database. I'm gonna go for a PolarDB, and that is configured in Indonesia, Jakarta region, and I'm gonna just choose a PolarDB that is available. So I'm gonna go for this migration test database, right? And then test account, password, and I'm going to quickly test the connectivity, making sure that DTS is able to connect to this PolarDB successfully. So it's taking some time because some network connectivity issue, but now it's passed. So successfully connected to both the source and target database. So I'm okay to proceed. All right, over here, you see this is the schema that is being automatically detected by DTS. We have this test schema available in my SQL database. I'm gonna do both the schema migration, the full data migration, as well as the incremental data migration, right? Meaning that when I do the migration, the data that's being inserted by this application to my SQL database will be synced up to my PolarDB. So let's just move everything over, and I'm gonna do a pre-check. This is done by the evaluation module, right? To do the pre-checking to make sure everything looks good, everything there's no drawback, there's no surprise, there's no sticker shock in the migration process. And you can see there's a bunch of things that's being checked by DTS. Everything looks good. I'm gonna go over here. This is different pricing option. I'm just gonna go for the default option, the large channel. Data transmission, agree to the terms. Quickly start this process. So at this point, I have created this task, this migration task, right? Demo migration from 1 to 2. And I can, this is a scheduler. I can start a task or multiple tasks at once, depending on my business needs. So let's say the status is migrating. I believe this is automatically started after the pre-checking process. So let's minimize this window and take a look at what's happening here. All right, not yet. Status migrating. All right. Let me kind of stop it. No. All right, let's just keep an eye on these scripts and see what's happening here. Sending data to MySQL. There's no data in PolarDB yet. And then this is the application. Keep writing data to MySQL. All right. Let's put it this way. All right, so now the schema migration is 100% down, meaning that when you pull data from PolarDB, you can already see the row count being 0, right? So the schema objects are migrated. And then now, when you query from PolarDB, it's a 345, 355, that's the full data migration. And that's like one big chunk, 355 rows, right? This tells me that we are still doing the full data migration. We have all those rows, but data hasn't been successfully inserted yet. The moment when I start seeing 356 and 357, that tells me the data, the incremental data has been ingested to PolarDB, right? So as you can see, there's data increasing in my SQL database from my application. This is data generated during the migration process, and those incremental data has not been captured in my target database. Let's give it some time. All right, so now you can see this is caught up, right? 366 and then 367, 368, right? That means going from here to here, those 11 rows that were generated in the migration process, they have been successfully captured in my PolarDB endpoint, and now my target and my my source databases are in sync, right? Running this DTS mission. So this is how easy that you can migrate your database from source to target on Alibaba Cloud. Thank you for watching this demonstration. We look forward to talking to you next time.